And if I could say one thing to all people in the United States, it's this: America has broken its own rules, has broken its own laws. It's time for the citizenry of the United States to actually follow its own laws. If we stay steadfast to the Constitution, at least, we won't be hit so hard with that global agenda.
You talk about freedom and tyranny. I seldom hear politicians use those words.
That's right. I think those are our only two choices, and we've had a grand experiment in this country where we emphasize freedom. If you read the Constitution was designed to protect individual liberty, to restrain the government. But we have forgotten that. Now we have an interpretation which means that we spy on the American people, encroach on their privacy, take care of them, run the nanny state, and then we have secrecy in government. So we have it now reversed. People say, well, they'll criticize me and say, oh, Ron, you want to go back to the Dark Ages, back to the Dark Ages of the strict interpretation of the Constitution. Well, I want to go back to the Constitution, but I don't consider it the Dark Ages. I think the Dark Ages were the days when all you had was tyranny. So freedom is new, tyranny is old, it's ancient.
Well, here it is. This isn't the Dark Ages. This is the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. We don't need 55,000 pages of tax code alone and its explanations. This is enough. Everything is in here.
Fantastic, isn't it? Truth is simple. It is not complex. And people ask me, how do I explain what I'm talking about? And I say, freedom is popular. And it is not complex. The more complex it is, the more leery we ought to be of what they're doing. When they come across and they say, aha, we have to solve the problems of 9/11, we'll pass the Patriot Act. Well, that's complex. 400 pages, and they dump it on us an hour before we vote. You can read the Constitution, you understand it, but you cannot read and understand hardly any of the legislation being passed.
And win or lose, are you having a good time educating people about the Constitution?
I think the most fun is probably the fact that there's a greater number of people than I ever dreamed that still remember the Constitution, and they were waiting for somebody to speak in defense of the Constitution. But the other almost miraculous thing is happening. The young people are responding, and they come in. And when I ask them, why do you join the campaign? And I'll say, we love your position on the Constitution. We love your position on freedom. These are young people who understand. It's not like they don't understand what they're inheriting. They know something about Social Security, and they know something about intrusion of personal liberties and personal choices. That, to me, is a lot of fun.
So you mentioned the Constitution a couple of times. You, of course, are one of those there are a few like you in the government in the U.S. who have the level of experience you do. Based on what you've seen, how things have changed, do you feel the Constitution, the American Constitution, has remained intact? Is it serving its purpose?
No, not really. Most members of Congress believe they do their very best. They just interpret it differently because we've had quite a few generations now teach our young people that interpreting the Constitution is flexible. It should be modernized. They don't say amend it if you want to change it. They say, well, you can interpret certain provisions of the Constitution differently, and therefore you do have the authority. Some even argue that if the Constitution doesn't prohibit something, you're allowed to do it, and that's not the way it's written. The Constitution is written explicitly to say you can't do anything, that is the U.S. government, unless the Constitution gives you direct authority to do it. So they misinterpret it, and they don't lose any sleep over it. So once again, it's an educational effort to understand what our system is all about and why limited government and following the rule of law is so important.
Because liberty is my most important issue. My goal in life is to do whatever I can to preserve that entity called liberty, which is what I believe made this country great, because we had been given the maximum amount of liberty of any country before. And believe me, I think if we would have followed the direction of our Constitution and protected our liberties, we'd be a lot better off today. But when you think about defending liberty, we can look to our Constitution. It's pretty darn good. But you know, I've actually decided that the document itself is secondary. it's good to have a document. We should have the rule of law, and we should be very keen on following the rule of law. But we have a document called the Constitution. Everybody goes to Congress. Everybody takes the same oath. And it seems like nobody knows what they're doing, you know. Everybody takes the same oath. And it's strange. Most of them believe they're following the Constitution. You know, today, you know, with the new Congress, there's a new rule that anytime you pass a law today, anytime you introduce legislation, you have to cite the portion of the Constitution that you get the authority to do what you're doing. But it doesn't help. You know, they cite the General Welfare Clause. Oh, we can do anything we want under the General Welfare Clause. Oh, the Interstate Commerce Clause. What have they been doing with that? The Interstate Commerce, anything you want. And then they'll cite the end of Article 1, Section 8. They list the things we're allowed to do. They don't pay a lot of attention to that, but at the end it says you can write any law necessary and proper to enforce Article 1, Section 8. But no, they dissect that out and they say, well, we're writing this law because it's necessary and proper to do so. So the Constitution hasn't restrained people from doing what we've ended up with. We go to war without declaration. We have a welfare state that's not authorized in the Constitution. We have a monetary system that disobeys flagrantly, you know, the Constitution. So it hasn't worked. And I think it was Adams that said that, you know, it won't work unless you have a moral people. And if you have an immoral people who will send individuals to Washington and they're tolerated to not follow the laws, the Constitution won't do us any good. But I think we've reached this point. But what I see happening right now is a growing number of people that are concerned are starting to say we've had enough and we should have a different approach, and we can't let people go along and say the Constitution is a breathing, living document and we have to adapt it, but don't bother to amend it. Just do whatever you want and justify it because it's so necessary and we don't have time to amend the Constitution. I think about the war issue especially. On the constitutional issue. That's something I've worked on for so many years, of saying, no, there's too many, and why are we doing this? I mean, I was aware of World War II. I was aware of the Korean War. Teachers left our school and didn't come back, and then there was the Vietnam War, and during that decade I was in the service. I didn't go to Vietnam. And Korea was undeclared, Vietnam was undeclared, and we fight wars constantly. And who starts the wars? I mean, where's the authority come from? Where's it supposed to come from? It's supposed to come from the people through their Congress, and there's supposed to be a vote for a declaration of war. And I didn't like what happened in Vietnam. I ended up being in Congress when we were getting ready to go into Iraq. And it was very important to me that I do what I could to hold the Congress accountable. So I was on the International Relations Committee, as I am now, and they were debating this resolution to give the authority to the President to do this. So I introduced a resolution to declare war in the committee. And I said that I'm not going to vote for the war, but we should, if you want to go to war, you should declare the war. Get everybody behind the war, and we'll all come together, the people behind it, and get it over with. And, of course, nobody voted for it. And they said, and the chairman of the committee at that time said that, he says, Congressman Paul, he says, you should ignore that because that part of the Constitution is an anachronism. We don't follow that anymore. And I got to thinking, well, that's about the way they look at the whole Constitution. Maybe the gold and silver legal tender provision. It's an anachronism. We don't follow, and that's for sure. So it is the lack of respect for the rule of law and sending people there that either don't understand what the Constitution is supposed to mean, or they don't have the character to follow it. And we've ended up with a mess. We've ended up with constant war and constant escalating expansion of the welfare state, and we're flat out broke.
Thank you. Congressman Paul, you call your campaign a revolution, And I think it's safe to say that your brand of change is one of the most sweeping proposed by any candidate of either party. But getting your agenda through Congress would likely require a revolution of an entirely different sort. So how would you adjust your plan in light of political reality in Washington?
Well, the secret is the term revolution wasn't my word, and it didn't come up on our webpage. It was coined by the supporters. But in a way, it is revolutionary to go back to the Constitution. And we'd like to continue the old revolution. And believe me, freedom is unifying. We bring a lot of people together. People then are free to choose what they would like to do with their lives, free to choose how they would spend their money. And all of a sudden, we wouldn't be telling other countries how to live.
But
so this brings people together. And I think it's appealing to both left and right and middle. And our campaign really has that appeal. So therefore, we would bring the Congress together.
The president asks a very important question, and we should all come together, and we shouldn't have that many disagreements because we should be bound down by the Constitution. But the people in this country think we live in an age of relative ethics, is what they have come to the conclusion of. Sure, profess to believe in the Constitution, but why have we gone to war since World War II without a declaration of war? Why do we have a monetary system that is not designed by the Constitution? Why do we have a welfare state running out of control, not designed by the Constitution? You can't pay lip service to the Constitution without obeying it. And we should have peace and prosperity. That should be our goal. We in foreign policy ought to have a golden rule. We ought to treat others as we would want others to treat us, and we don't treat others so fairly. We treat them like we're the bully, that we're the policeman of the world, and we're going to tell them to behave. If they don't listen to us, we bomb them. If they listen to us, we give them more money, and it's bankrupting this country because we don't live up to our principles. The principles are embedded in our Constitution.
And if I could say one thing to all people in the United States, it's this: America has broken its own rules, has broken its own laws. It's time for the citizenry of the United States to actually follow its own laws. If we stay steadfast to the Constitution, at least we won't be hit so hard with that global agenda.